Welcome to the Moment of Suspension podcast. This is Dr. Rebecca Jarzombeck, your host, also mostly known as Dr. Beck to most people. Today is episode 4, which I'm really excited to drop and share with you. This conversation is called The Gap, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is not a comfortable conversation to have. It's actually brings up the most feelings in my own nervous system to try to articulate this. I thought my previous episode of Performance Overdrive would be the most challenging. I cried in the first episode of The Origin of Suspension. Performance Overdrive, not so much, which is kind of interesting because it matches that season of life. It's exactly that. You know, just as a recap, Performance Overdrive is this place that you have gotten a certain level of success. You feel pleased with where you've gotten to at some points, but it then becomes this place that you usually hit a plateau or a place that we could call burnout. And that is what happened to me. And so then the question is, what's next after that? And that's today. What we're talking about is the gap. The gap is really the crux of this entire podcast, The Moment of Suspension, because I think the most people will probably relate to this conversation. And if you don't, maybe you'll consciously start to realize maybe you're in it or you've been in it. And so I'm definitely looking for somebody to interview for this. So yeah, I've gotten some cool DMs from friends, colleagues, clients, and things like that. So definitely interested in interviewing people for all of these different conversations. But the gap is the in-between place. So this is where you've come to the realization that your past or possibly current strategy and system of, your life or your business or, sports, riding horses is not working anymore. And you're having to start to ask yourself some deep, uncomfortable questions. Sometimes there's a trigger that ends up putting you into this space, this in-between place of where you've been and where you want to go, or maybe you don't even know where you want to go anymore. That's also what can make this just such a kind of lonely season, to be honest. Performance Overdrive is a season that can feel very rewarding, exciting. There's a lot of adrenaline. It also can be a place that you've felt like you have control of the situation, which is why my nervous system, really, that has been my default most of my life, because there were, things earlier on as a little girl with things with my family and traumas and things that kind of crafted me into be this like woman of, I can handle it. And if I just move quicker and make decisions and grind and move on to the next thing, that will sustain me. And then you realize it doesn't sustain you. And most people, I think, would agree with that, men and women, in their own experiences. And so then you end up in the gap. Because you've come to the realization that what I was doing, I don't want to do anymore. It isn't necessarily that you don't want to ride horses anymore. You don't want to do your current business, or you don't want to be in the current relationship that you're in. However, those definitely start to become questions. I'm going to share, be a little vulnerable with some things that I went through over the last 5 years, just to kind of get people to think about, maybe that's me. So, it's this in-between place. It can be lonely, but when you start to enter it, I will say I started to enter what I would call the gap in 2019, 2020. It didn't really climax until 2023. It was when I wanted to just like fully burn my business down. And so there were a couple themes in my own life that I've already kind of mentioned. I'll touch on again. My really expensive show jumper started stopping. I couldn't get him around jumping courses anymore. So that totally made me have to reevaluate what I was doing with my goals of riding. And so again, kind of entering this phase of the gap where you're like, I don't really know how to proceed forward. I can't achieve the goals that I thought I wanted to with riding. Then with my business, my animal chiropractic business, that started to plateau. It's a very physical job, in addition to some regulatory red tape that we've been dealing with, not only in California, but nationwide. So feeling like I couldn't, move forward with that business, but I didn't want to fully exit. And then I had been in a relationship, fast forward for about 5 years as well. And that had not turned into marriage. And so there were these very important parts of my life that I just felt like I wasn't moving forward. I want to just touch on, the term moment of suspension again, the name of this podcast. So moment of suspension can be, it's this really amazing place that we all, I think, chase a lot in life, that is this place of flow and ease and peace. It comes from the term of riding a horse and creating suspension. And true suspension with a horse, and this could be applied to anything in life, is having the right amount of leg, so kicking the horse forward, but also catching that energy in your hand to be able to lift and create this power in suspension. And a true, beautiful moment of suspension, when it's done correctly, creates this power, but you continue to move forward with ease. There's also the flip side, and I will use riding as the metaphor, but then this also can be transferred into anything in life. And for somebody that doesn't ride horses, is you also can create what we call an artificial moment of suspension, or false collection is what we call it in riding horses. And that could be, it's basically bad riding. And you are kicking the horse forward, you're asking him to go forward, you're trying to create power, and you're pulling too much. There's too much control. And this is actually what can set a horse up to stop and not want to jump. And it, from the outsider's perspective, could look like you've got this horse powered up. But internally, it's, like I said, it's bad riding. It's giving the horse conflicting information. I think we, as a human, could identify this as well. And it gets to a point where it's the same thing in Performance Overdrive or business or something in your life where you're like, I thought it was working, but really, I guess I need to get better at riding, because now the outcome that I wanted, use horses as an example, getting through a course, with ease, is now hard. And so you can start blaming all of these things, where really part of it is just that it was your riding and the information that you were giving the horse. And so the symptom is, horse stopping or something in life that's just not going your way. So that's kind of the nutshell. And this in-between place that someone can come to the realization like, oh my gosh, I've hit this plateau in life. How do I move into this next season? And the reason why so many people, I think, get stuck in this place that we call the gap is because it really is a place that you have to go internal and start to rewire your nervous system, because the past strategies just aren't working anymore. And it makes you start to question your own identity. And it can be challenging because you're like, well, now what other people think of me, of who Dr. Beck was or how she operated or what she accommodated, she isn't anymore. And so it's not only yourself that you're having to recalibrate, kind of deconstruct and then reconstruct. It's also maybe what other people think of you. That could be in a business that you've hit a plateau and you're like, I want to do the business, but I want to do it a different way. And so with that can come loss. Friendships might be lost, current relationship you might leave. Maybe you do shut a business down and you wait to figure out what's next. This season, as painful as it can be, also can turn into a really beautiful season. And I can relate to that. When I first entered a season of the gap, I was at the climax of burnout. I was frustrated. I was irritated. I was angry. I was resentful. All of these things, I think, is the tipping point a lot of times that will push someone into this season of the gap. But then once you're in it, you calm down and you realize, okay, let's figure this out. And the thing about this is what's sad is I think this can really take a lot of people out, because it does require work on your end, but it also requires you to release control. And these are things that are hard for a lot of us to do. And this is where, for me, faith has come into play. It also required me to hire a business coach. It required me to increase my capacity? And that's really the overarching conversation as well. The two concepts that I also can seem, confusing, or you're like, what does that mean? The conversation of capacity and identity, and they really do go hand in hand. And so just tipping back to Performance Overdrive, however you operated in that season, or way of being rather, it can get you to a certain level of capacity, but it's borrowed. It's borrowed at that point. You're kind of running off of applause. You're running off of adrenaline. And then obviously you get to a point where you're like, okay, where I want to go, this isn't going to work anymore. So then the gap is going to force you to recalibrate a new level of capacity. And that really starts with you becoming a new version of you, and not like changing completely who you are, but having to work through some of those internals that got you hung up, in the past. So some characteristics of the gap can be a place that feels like you're not moving forward. It also can be a place of stillness, which is not a bad thing. There's, I had listed some of those feelings that you can have in the beginning, but then as the gap progresses, you begin to find some peace. And that's the cool part about this, is when the identity of yourself starts to really recalibrate and you start to get to, I would say, like the backside of the gap, is where after that is where you're going to enter the phase of surrender, but not quite. And this is a place that you begin to release control. You begin to get clarity, but it's not forcing. And that's the difference of Performance Overdrive, which is a place where you tend to force and control. The gap forces you to start to go inward and to recalibrate that system into, what does that look like, me being able to move forward without impeding that flow. It's not just up to me, right? It's finding that sweet spot where God can take control as well, and that you really are able to step into your calling and assignment and what it is that you want to be doing in a sustainable way. One of the hardest parts about the gap is staying in it, because it can be really tempting to exit and go back to the old ways, the old patterns that did get you to a certain level. And I think that does happen with a lot of people. I can't even say that hasn't happened to me, because when you're working on doing things in a more sustainable way, it's and you're in that waiting season of getting to where it is you want to go. There's lack of evidence, like Performance Overdrive had evidence. You're like, well, I can get it done this way, versus in the gap, you're waiting for evidence of the new way of doing things, which begins once you start to release and enter a phase of surrender. But that is the hardest part, and it will take a lot of people out because it's uncomfortable, and you have to trust that you're going to get to where you're going. If you think you're in the gap, one of the best pieces of advice would be to keep going. So to just stay. And that's one of the hardest things in life, right? When you don't know how to move forward, is also to find good people. I said this season might be a season where you need to find new friends. And it's not always fun. It can be painful, but it's one of those places also, where faith, or finding things that ground you, that you realize that you're not alone, and this really isn't all on you, right? Like, life is really beautiful. So let's figure out how to do this the right way, the more fun way too. And I was in the ER one time with a friend that had gotten hurt. And I remember we were sitting in the waiting room, and they had him like in a wheelchair, and he didn't need to be in it, by the way. But this nurse came up and there was a space near him, and she goes, "Oh, you can move over a little bit." She's like, "Oh, you know what? We'll just leave this space. We'll leave this space for the Holy Spirit." And it made me laugh because it's so true. It's like, why do we always try to fill in the space? Sometimes just leave it, just be. And I think the season of the gap, which isn't necessarily what people want to hear, where it isn't necessarily like 1, 2, 3 or do this or that. It's literally allowing there to be the white space, the space that will allow you to come to clarity. Go for the walks, go ride your horse, continue to work and do the things you need to do, but you're not necessarily doing, you're more focused on being, because that really is the upgrade. That's the most important part. You'll hear some entrepreneurs say, when I made the most amount of money was when I went on vacation with my family and I finally took a break from the business or whatever it was, right? If that business was able to run without them physically being present. Just some examples. And why was that? You don't always have an explanation. You can get pretty esoteric with that, right? But it shows, and that becomes evidence for that person. They're like, okay, I don't need to just like put my foot on the gas. Like some of my biggest revenue months were actually when I was having the most fun and things like that. So the gap doesn't have to mean that you're not progressing forward either, but it also can be a season where you're definitely rethinking how you do things, and maybe what you thought needed to be a certain way. It can be a lot easier than that, actually. We make things so much harder than they need to a lot of times. So I would say, if you're feeling like you're in the gap, go have some fun. Stop being so serious. Maybe find some new friends. Work on your current relationships, your marriage, or if you're in a, boyfriend, girlfriend, or, if you're not married, go start working on yourself so you find the right person. It's that type of season, because after that, and we'll get into, I want to do definitely some interviews for people that can articulate and have related to this. Same for Performance Overdrive. I want to find a man to interview, but I also want to find clients and friends that want to share their moments of suspension. And if there's any episodes so far that they feel like they can relate to. After this, we're going to move into what we call the surrender, which is when you've exited the gap, so to speak, because you've come to clarity and you're feeling like you can move forward, but now it's in a more of a peaceful, regulated way. Your nervous system's upgraded. And then after that is what gives you the ability to really step into your calling or assignment. And all of these things will change through life. I've been a couple different things in my life. I had different jobs before I was a chiropractor, right? So it isn't that it's so finite, but I'm excited to share this series. The goal is probably to turn it into a book, and then just start having more and more moment of suspension conversations of just really cool stories that people have had that maybe thread throughout some of these topics and episodes.